In 1882, a cowboy walked into the Occidental Saloon in Tombstone, Arizona, and sat down to chicken giblet soup, leg of lamb with oysters, and plum pudding with custard. 50 cents. Same year, a trailhand in Dodge City paid a nickel for a bowl of stew made from tongue, brains, liver, and whatever else came out of the cow that morning. Nobody asked what was in it. You just ate. Number 14 on this list was so common that every cattle town in America served it. But if you put it on a plate today, most people would call the health department. And number 1 was considered the ultimate cowboy delicacy, a dish so strange that modern Americans cannot believe anyone ate it on purpose. These 25 meals tell the real story of what frontier America actually tasted like. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count them down. Number 25, hardtack and coffee. Before there were menus, before there were tables, before some saloons even had walls, there was hardtack. These rock-hard squares of flour and water were baked until every drop of moisture was gone, creating crackers so dense they could chip a tooth if you bit down wrong. Civil War soldiers carried them west, and by the 1870s, saloons and mining camps kept barrels behind the bar as the cheapest food available. A single cracker cost less than a penny. The trick was soaking it in black coffee until it softened into something you could chew without breaking a molar. Cowboys called hardtack sheet iron and worm castles because weevils burrowed into the crackers during storage. Experienced hands learned to eat in the dark so they would not see what was crawling inside. Modern Americans spend $4 on artisan crackers at Whole Foods. A frontier cowboy spent half a cent on something that doubled as a building material. Number 24, bacon and beans. If hardtack was survival, bacon and beans was civilization. Every saloon from Abilene to Deadwood served some version of this dish. Dried pinto beans cost almost nothing, could be stored for months without spoiling. And when simmered for hours with a slab of salt pork or bacon, they became the single most reliable meal on the frontier. Cowboys called beans Arizona strawberries with a straight face. The bacon was not the crispy strips Americans eat today. It was thick-cut salt pork, often rancid by modern standards, cured so heavily with salt that it could survive a 2-month cattle drive without refrigeration. A plate cost about 10 cents in 1878. Trail cooks made it in cast-iron Dutch ovens buried in coals, and the pot never truly emptied. You just added more beans, more water, and kept it going for days. The smell of pork fat and simmering beans drifting out of a saloon door was the first thing a cowboy noticed riding into town. Number 23, sourdough biscuits. Every chuckwagon cook and every saloon kitchen kept a sourdough starter alive, like it was a member of the family. Some starters traveled thousands of miles across the frontier, passed from cook to cook, and were kept warm against a man's body on freezing nights so the yeast would not die. A good starter was worth more than a good horse in some camps. The biscuits themselves were dense, tangy, and golden brown when cooked right in a cast iron skillet, greased with lard. They soaked up bacon grease, bean juice, and gravy like nothing else. A saloon cook who could turn out hot sourdough biscuits every morning had job security for life. The flour cost about 3 cents a pound in the 1870s. A dozen biscuits could feed a whole table. When the starter died, and it sometimes did, in freezing weather, experienced cooks could revive a new one from wild yeast in the air. But old-timers swore the flavor was never quite the same. Number 22, fried salt pork and gravy. Before cattle herds made beef cheap, salt pork was king. Saloons fried thick slabs in cast iron skillets until the edges curled and crisped, then used the rendered fat to make a thick white gravy with flour and water or milk if they had it. This was called sawmill gravy in some regions, and it was poured over everything: biscuits, potatoes, bread, even plain rice. The salt pork was so heavily preserved it could last a year without refrigeration, essential in towns where supply wagons arrived only once a month. A pound cost about 12 cents in 1875. Cowboys ate it 3 meals a day on long drives and claimed they could taste salt in their sweat for weeks afterward. The gravy masked the intense saltiness and stretched the meat further. 1 slab of pork and a cup of flour could feed 4 men. Number 21, vinegar pie. When fresh fruit was a distant memory and the nearest apple orchard was 500 miles east, frontier cooks invented dessert from desperation. Vinegar pie used apple cider vinegar, sugar, eggs, butter, and a splash of vanilla, baked in a simple crust. The vinegar created a tangy custard filling that mimicked the tartness of lemon or apple when neither existed within 100 miles. Cowboys called it desperation pie, and they meant it as a compliment. A whole pie cost maybe 15 cents to make. The filling set up smooth and trembling, sweet enough to satisfy, but with that sharp vinegar bite that reminded everyone they were a long way from home. Some cooks added nutmeg or cinnamon to dress it up. Others served it plain with black coffee. Number 20, fried rabbit. Before chicken farms dotted the plains, rabbit was the everyday protein of the American West. Jackrabbits and cottontails were so plentiful that a man with a decent aim could bag supper in 20 minutes. Saloon cooks bought rabbits from local hunters for a few cents apiece, skinned them, jointed them, dredged the pieces in seasoned flour, and fried them in lard until the coating crackled. Served with biscuits and gravy, fried rabbit was the frontier equivalent of fried chicken, and old-timers swore it tasted better. The meat was lean, slightly gamey, and tender when cooked right. Too long in the pan and it turned tough as saddle leather. The bones went into the stock pot for soup the next day. Nothing was wasted. By the 1890s, as cattle and chicken became cheaper, rabbit faded from saloon menus almost overnight. Number 19, canned oysters. Here is where things get strange. Cowboys were obsessed with oysters. Not fresh ones from the coast, but tinned oysters packed in brine and shipped west by rail and wagon. By the 1870s, canned oysters were one of the most popular saloon foods in the entire American West. A Montana cowboy named Teddy Blue later wrote that the first thing a cowpuncher ordered when he got to town was oysters, celery, and eggs, the 3 things he could not get on the trail. Saloons served them fried, stewed, in soup, or straight from the tin with crackers. A can cost about 20 cents, expensive by frontier standards, which made oysters a celebration food. After months of beans and salt pork, that briny metallic taste of tinned oysters was luxury itself. Some saloons made oyster stew with milk and butter, a rich indulgence cowboys dreamed about on the trail. First pattern break, the free lunch. Here is something most Americans do not know. Saloons across the Wild West offered free food, not out of generosity, but out of business strategy. Buy a beer for a nickel, and you could eat as much as you wanted from the spread laid out at one end of the bar. Saloon keepers loaded these spreads with the saltiest food they could find. Pickled eggs, smoked herring, salted pretzels, cured meats, all designed to make a man so thirsty he would keep buying drinks. The phrase "there is no such thing as a free lunch" literally comes from this practice. A cowboy might walk in planning to spend 5 cents and walk out having spent 50 cents. The food was real and often surprisingly good. German saloon keepers served sausages and sauerkraut. Irish ones offered corned beef and cabbage. Every bite was an advertisement for the next glass of beer. Temperance leagues targeted the free lunch as proof that saloons were traps for working men. By Prohibition in 1920, the practice vanished entirely. But for decades, it fed thousands of hungry cowboys, miners, and drifters who had nothing but a nickel and an empty stomach. Number 17, bear steak. In the mountain towns of Colorado, Montana, and the Dakotas, bear meat showed up on saloon menus as regularly as beef. Hunters brought whole carcasses into town, and saloon cooks cut thick steaks from the hindquarters, seared them in cast iron, and served them rare with potatoes and onions. The meat was dark, rich, and fatty, with a wild flavor that changed depending on what the bear had been eating. A bear that fed on berries tasted almost sweet. One that had been eating fish tasted like the river. In 1865, a Chicago restaurateur offered bear paws braised in burgundy sauce alongside wild boar and squirrel pie. By frontier standards, a simple bear steak with salt and pepper was a feast. As settlements grew and bear population shrank, the meat disappeared from menus by the turn of the century. Number 16, cornbread and potlicker. Cornbread was the bread of the frontier, baked in cast iron skillets, greased with bacon fat until the crust turned golden and crackled when you broke it apart. Unlike wheat flour, cornmeal was cheap, locally grown, and available almost everywhere west of the Mississippi. A pound cost 2 or 3 cents. Saloon cooks baked it fresh for every meal. The real magic was potlicker, the rich broth left behind after boiling greens, beans, or salt pork. Cowboys would crumble cornbread into a bowl and ladle potlicker over it, creating a simple stew more nourishing than it had any right to be. The vitamins from the greens, the fat from the pork, and the carbohydrates from the corn made it a nearly complete meal for almost nothing. In frontier towns, potlicker was considered medicine. Mothers gave it to sick children and the elderly. Saloons served it without shame because everyone knew what it was worth. Number 15, elk stew. In the Rocky Mountain territories, elk was more common than beef. Hunters sold fresh elk to saloons for pennies on the pound because a single bull could feed an entire mining camp for a week. Saloon cooks cut the tougher shoulders and shanks into chunks, browned them in lard, and simmered them for hours with wild onions, potatoes, and whatever root vegetables were available. The resulting stew was dark, almost purple in color, with a deep, rich flavor that made beef taste bland by comparison. For men who spent their days underground in silver mines or chest-deep in freezing rivers panning for gold, a bowl of elk stew was the finest thing on earth. As commercial cattle ranching expanded in the 1880s, wild game was gradually pushed off saloon menus in favor of cheaper, more predictable beef. Number 14, son of a gun stew. This is the dish that defined the frontier. When cowboys slaughtered a steer on the trail, the cook used everything, and everything meant everything. Tongue, heart, liver, kidneys, sweetbreads, brains, marrow gut, and tripe all went into one enormous cast iron pot with onions, potatoes, and chili peppers. The stew simmered for hours, turning miscellaneous organs into something rich, thick, and surprisingly delicious. Cowboys had a much less polite name for it, but in respectable company, they called it son of a gun stew. The critical ingredient was the marrow gut, the tube connecting the two stomachs of a calf. When cooked properly, it released a creamy substance that thickened the broth and gave it a velvety texture. A cowboy's toughness was sometimes measured by whether he could finish a full bowl without asking what was in it. Every cattle town saloon from Dodge City to Abilene served some version. Modern Americans throw away the parts that cowboys built entire meals around. Second pattern break, the saloon steak. Now here is where modern restaurants have rewritten history. When Americans picture a cowboy eating steak, they imagine a perfectly grilled ribeye, pink in the center. The reality was completely different. Saloon steaks were tough, overcooked, and often came from old dairy cows or work oxen past their prime. The meat was so tough that one European visitor described cutting into it as an exercise requiring both hands and considerable determination. Saloons did not have refrigeration, so meat was either freshly slaughtered, heavily salted, or already turning. Hot sauce and pepper were not flavor choices, they were camouflage. A steak dinner at a decent saloon cost about 25 cents in the 1880s. It came with bread, beans, and coffee. No sides menu, no temperature preference. You got what the cook made, and you were grateful. Texas cattlemen who drove their herds to Kansas rail towns ate the same overcooked beef they had spent 3 months herding north. The irony was not lost on them. Number 12, rattlesnake meat. This was not a dare or a novelty. In the desert Southwest, rattlesnake was genuine protein. Hunters killed them for safety and sold the meat to saloons, where cooks skinned the snakes, cut them into sections, battered the pieces, and fried them in lard. The taste was compared to chicken by nearly everyone who tried it, though the texture was more fibrous, with tiny, delicate bones. A fried rattlesnake plate served with beans and cornbread was a regular Tuesday supper in towns across Arizona and New Mexico territory. The skin was saved and sold to leather workers. The rattles became souvenirs. Some saloons kept live rattlesnakes in cages near the door as advertisement and entertainment, pulling them out to kill and cook fresh when customers ordered. Number 11, prairie chicken. Before Kentucky Fried Chicken, before factory farming existed in any form, Americans ate prairie chicken. These wild grouse roamed the Great Plains in flocks so massive that travelers described them darkening the sky. Saloon cooks roasted them whole, fried them in pieces, or stewed them with root vegetables. The meat was darker and more flavorful than domestic chicken, with a slight herbal quality from the bird's diet of wild seeds and insects. A single bird cost almost nothing because hunters brought them in by the dozen. By the 1880s, commercial hunting had decimated the population so severely that some species nearly went extinct. Market hunters shipped thousands east by rail to feed the appetite of cities like Chicago and New York. The wholesale slaughter eventually led to some of America's earliest wildlife conservation laws. The bird that once fed the entire frontier became so rare that today it is a protected species in most states. Number 10, jerky and pemmican. Long before protein bars, cowboys carried beef jerky and pemmican as frontier survival food. Jerky was made by cutting lean beef or game into thin strips, salting it heavily, and drying it in the sun or over a low smoky fire until it was hard as wood. It lasted months without spoiling. Pemmican, borrowed from Native American tradition, went further. Dried meat was pounded into powder, mixed with rendered fat, and sometimes dried berries, then packed into rawhide pouches. A pound of pemmican contained enough calories to sustain a man through a full day of hard riding. Some saloons sold both over-the-counter for travelers heading back out on the trail. It was not a meal you sat down to enjoy. It was insurance against starvation carried in your saddlebag. The version modern Americans buy at gas stations, soft, sweet, and vacuum-sealed, would be unrecognizable to any cowboy who ever chewed real trail jerky until his jaw ached. Number 9, fried potatoes and onions. When everything else ran out, there were potatoes. Saloon cooks sliced them thin, fried them in whatever fat was available, lard, bacon grease, beef tallow, and heaped them onto plates with fried onions and a heavy shake of salt. This was the default side dish of the entire frontier. Potatoes stored well, shipped well, and filled bellies when meat was scarce. A 50-pound sack cost less than $1 and could last weeks. In mining towns where supply wagons arrived sporadically, fried potatoes sometimes became the only food a saloon could serve for days. Nobody complained because the alternative was nothing. Number 8, chili con carne. Mexican vaqueros brought chili north with the cattle trade, and it became the signature dish of Texas saloons. Dried beef or tough fresh cuts were simmered for hours with dried chili peppers, cumin, garlic, and oregano in heavy cast iron pots. No beans, no tomatoes, just meat and chilies, thick enough to stand a spoon in. A bowl cost 10 cents and came with cornbread or tortillas. The heat level varied wildly, but frontier chili was almost always hotter than anything modern Americans would consider comfortable. By the 1880s, chili queens in San Antonio were famous for setting up open-air stands in the plazas, ladling out bowls of fiery chili to crowds of soldiers, cowboys, and tourists. Number 7, chicken fried steak. When beef was tough and cheap cuts were all that was available, frontier cooks borrowed a technique from German and Austrian immigrants who had been breading and frying meat for centuries. They took the toughest, cheapest steaks, usually round or chuck, pounded them thin with a mallet until the fibers broke down, dredged them in seasoned flour, and fried them in a skillet of hot lard until a golden crust formed. Smothered in white cream gravy made from the pan drippings, chicken fried steak turned inedible cuts into something tender and satisfying. The name came from the method, not the ingredient. It was steak fried in the style of fried chicken. A full plate cost about 15 cents in the 1870s and filled a man up for the rest of the day. Third pattern break, whiskey for breakfast. Here is what the history books leave out. In many frontier saloons, the first drink of the day was not coffee. It was whiskey. Cowboys, miners, and laborers started their mornings with a shot of rotgut alongside whatever food the saloon was serving. This was not alcoholism by frontier standards, it was normal. The whiskey itself was often dangerous. Saloon keepers stretched their supply by adding water, tobacco juice, red pepper, and sometimes strychnine in tiny amounts to give it bite. Cowboys called it coffin varnish, tarantula juice, and 40-rod whiskey, meaning it could kill a man at 40 rods distance. A shot cost 5 cents. The combination of bad whiskey and heavy fried food on an empty stomach defined the frontier morning. Modern Americans drink lattes and eat avocado toast. Their great-great-grandfathers drank poison and called it courage. Number 5. Scrapple. Borrowed from Pennsylvania Dutch communities and carried west by settlers, scrapple was the ultimate thrift food. Pork scraps, liver, and whatever trimmings were left after butchering were boiled together, then mixed with cornmeal and spices into a thick mush, poured into loaf pans and cooled until solid. The loaf was sliced thin and fried in lard until the outside turned crispy, while the inside stayed soft and rich. Saloons in frontier towns from Missouri to California served fried scrapple for breakfast alongside eggs and coffee. A single hog could produce enough scrapple to last a saloon kitchen for a week. The taste was savory, peppery, and porky, with a crunchy exterior that shattered when you bit through it. Number 4. Biscuits and Redeye gravy. In the South and the cattle trail towns that inherited Southern cooking traditions, Redeye gravy was the morning ritual. After frying a thick slice of country ham in a cast-iron skillet, the cook would deglaze the pan with black coffee, scraping up all the browned bits and creating a thin, intensely salty and bitter gravy poured over split biscuits. The combination of smoky ham fat and strong coffee created something no modern gravy even attempts. It tasted like the frontier itself, harsh, strong, and impossible to forget. The ham was cured with salt and smoke for months, dense enough to keep without refrigeration, through an entire summer. Cowboys who grew up on Redeye gravy in Tennessee or Georgia carried the taste west with them and demanded it at every saloon they entered. Number 3. Rocky Mountain oysters. There is no delicate way to say this. Rocky Mountain oysters are deep-fried bull testicles. During spring roundup, when young bulls were castrated to make them calmer and better for beef production, cowboys were left with buckets of fresh testicles. Waste nothing was not a slogan on the frontier. It was a survival code. The preparation was simple. Peel, slice, dredge in seasoned flour, and fry in hot lard until golden and crispy. Served hot, sometimes with hot sauce or mustard, and eaten without ceremony. Cowboys called them prairie oysters, calf fries, cowboy caviar, and a dozen other euphemisms. Saloons in cattle towns served them during branding season as a specialty, and cowhands considered them a genuine delicacy, not a joke. The taste was mild, slightly creamy, with a texture somewhere between fried mushrooms and sweetbreads. Modern Americans encounter them at rodeos and Western festivals, where they are still served with a wink. But on the frontier, nobody was winking. They were eating. Number 2. Buffalo hump roast. Before the great slaughter of the 1870s and 1880s nearly wiped bison from the face of the earth, buffalo was the primary red meat of the western frontier. The most prized cut was the hump. The fatty, marbled meat from the bison shoulder hump was roasted over open flames or slow-cooked in Dutch ovens until it fell apart at the touch of a fork. The fat content was extraordinary, richer than any beef, with a deep, wild flavor that frontier travelers described as the finest meat they had ever eaten. Saloons in towns near the great buffalo hunting grounds served hump roast as a premium dish because everyone knew the buffalo would not last forever. Mountain men and Native Americans had been eating hump meat for centuries before the frontier saloons got hold of it. By the mid-1880s, the great herds were gone. An estimated 30 to 60 million bison had been reduced to fewer than 1,000. The hump roast that crowned saloon tables across the American West vanished almost overnight. Today, ranched bison is available at specialty butchers, but the wild buffalo hump roast exists only in the journals of men who tasted it before it was too late. Number 1. Son of a gun stew with marrow gut. We return to where the frontier story always ends, back at the cast iron pot. The finest version of son of a gun stew, the one that separated a legendary chuckwagon cook from a mediocre one, came down to a single ingredient, marrow gut from a freshly killed unweaned calf. This tube, connecting the calf's two stomachs, was still filled with partially digested mother's milk that had turned into a substance resembling creamy cheese. When sliced and added to the stew, it melted into the broth, creating a rich, velvety texture that nothing else could replicate. Cowboys fought over who got the pieces of marrow gut in their bowl. A cook who left it out was said to be making a stew that was a son of a gun with the son of a gun left out. This was the dish that made reputations. Trail bosses hired cooks based on their son of a gun stew. Cowboys chose which outfit to ride for based on the cook's skill with a cast iron pot. It was the one meal that defined the cowboy experience, the taste of the open trail, of cattle dust and campfire smoke, and the knowledge that you used every single part of the animal because that is what survival demanded. Modern Americans would not order it, and most would not eat it if they knew what was inside. But for the men who built the West, it was the greatest meal they ever had. These 25 meals are not museum pieces. They are the real food that built a nation. From the hardtack that sustained starving miners to the buffalo hump roast that disappeared with the herds, each dish tells a story of survival and waste-nothing ingenuity. Try explaining to your kids that great-great-grandpa ate fried bull testicles and called it a delicacy. Try telling them that the best stew on the frontier was made from organs most butchers throw away today. Share which one you would actually try in the comments.